Our second story out front, countdown to an Iran showdown. There is new evidence today that Iran is moving forward with a nuclear weapons program, just as talks are getting underway to convince the country to stop its suspected program. Now, negotiators from the International Atomic Energy Agency today left the Iranian mission in Vienna in silence. Usually, they'll take the opportunity. You see the cameras there to talk to them, to say something. They said nothing. The IAEA is in the middle of its first talks with Iran in 3 months. The latest report from the agency, of course, you may recall, said there were, quote, strong indications of possible nuclear weapons development. Indications like this picture from the Associated Press in today's Washington Post. Now, let me just explain exactly what you're looking at here, because I looked at this and said, what is this, something that could be in my backyard? It's a drawing of what's believed to be a nuclear explosion containment chamber hidden at a secret Iranian military base, perhaps near a site called Parchin, that the government in Iran has refused weapons inspectors access to. Experts say a chamber like this is what you use to test a nuclear weapon, and we talked to them. They confirmed that. Important to say, though, that this picture is not a picture that we have confirmed the authenticity of. There are, though, new signs that the economic sanctions against Iran are working. Take this story on the front page of today's Washington Post. Quote, Iran unable to sell oil stores it on tankers. Literally, they're storing it on tankers, turning off the GPS on the tankers so that, because it's against maritime law to do so, because they don't want anyone to know where the tankers are. Then they're trying to sail into ports and just find anyone to buy their oil. So earlier today, I spoke to Senator Dianne Feinstein. She is a key leader in the Senate on national security issues, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I began by asking her what it will take to reach an agreement with Iran.
I think all of us pretty much know what the parameters of an agreement are. And I think we also know the window is closing, that Israel is quite adamant that this is an existential threat, that she will not let Iran achieve a nuclear warhead. And that means all kinds of unpredictable military actions.
When you say everyone's on the same page about a deal, I was talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu a couple weeks ago, and he said he would allow no enrichment, none at all. Not even the 3% that you would be using if you were using nuclear power for medical use or things like that. That doesn't really seem to be the same page as the United States, though, right? I mean, would the United States accept a little bit more, right?
I don't think that's the United States position. I think it's confine enrichment to 5%, limit it to the medical isotopes, move anything above 5% out of the country or secure it, have full transparency and 24/7, 365-day-a-year access for the IAEA to all these sites, and then be willing to also talk about other things, which is what the Iranians have wanted to do. I am hopeful. In my view, it's the best chance of a solution. Of course, this is the P5+1, so it's a unique bargaining agent, you might say.
When you talk about access, I want to ask you about the Israel in a second, but Israel issue, but access. I have this picture, which I know it looks a little strange. The Associated Press obtained this from a government that is skeptical of Iran's honesty in its nuclear program. And they say this is a chamber used for testing explosives for nuclear weapons. We did make some calls today, and experts said, indeed, this would be consistent with that. But we haven't independently verified the source government. Supposedly it's at the Parchin site, though, which is the site the IAEA has not been able to get access to after repeated requests. How big of a problem is this?
Well, number one, I've never seen that picture. It could be from anywhere.
That's right.
So I don't know where it's from, so a comment would be useless. I can say this. The decision, as far as our intelligence is concerned, is that Iran has not made the decision to enrich to military-grade uranium. Now, having said that, there's no comment on whether they have speeded things up so they could get to that position, so that if a decision was made, they could go more quickly.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, I think that's what's out there. There's one other thing. The sanctions are biting. They're biting deeply. Additional sanctions will go into play with the central bank. And so by June or July, the sanctions should be approximately full tilt.
Iran is going to ask for the sanctions to be rolled back. Don't put those really tough sanctions that Europe was going to be putting on this summer. Don't do it, because we've made progress. That's what they're going to ask for. Is there any way you think that the United States, at least, would say, okay, we don't have to put that extra round of sanctions on, or is that something that must go forward to get the final deal done?
Well, this is just my view.
Yes.
My view is that the sanctions should not be lessened until and if there is a final deal concurred in by all.
And that leads me to Israel, where you said the U.S. and Israel aren't necessarily on the same page in terms of what level of enrichment to allow. Prime Minister Netanyahu telling me nothing, you're saying the U.S. would allow up to 5%. How is the U.S. and Israel going to bridge that gap? Because if they say 0, we say 5, and they strike, we're going to be involved.
Well, there is a strong difference between the United States and Israel. There also is a strong likelihood that if Israel were to attack, the United States would be drawn into what would become rapidly another war with Iran that could have catastrophic consequences throughout the Middle East. And one of the things that we don't do well is follow through on figuring out, if you do this and they do that, then what happens? We support Israel.
Right.
Israel is close to us. Obviously, we're going to back up Israel.
Right.
Then, is it war? And then what do the rest of the Middle East do?
Is it war? The big question that everyone has to be thinking very much about here in the Senate, in Washington, and in this country over the next few months. Next on Out Front,